we can get started. If you don't know me, I am Kate Beaton. I'm the Western organizer for Wisconsin Conservation Voters. I'm from Eau Claire, and we're happy to present to you this event tonight, Clean Energy and Partisanship, to talk about why Wisconsinites support clean energy across political spectrums and how we can move forward together to continue and increase the development of clean energy in our state. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure everyone knew that this event is being recorded. It'll be posted on our Facebook and on our YouTube channel, and so you will be able to watch it again if you're interested. You also can send it to people that you know if you think that they would be interested in it. With that in mind, that this is being recorded, please be mindful of good webinar etiquette. Keep your mics off, and be mindful that if you have your video on, that it is being recorded. So we also will have plenty of time at the end for a Q&A. So feel free to send your questions to the chat box. They'll go to the administrator of this event, to the host of this event. Send them to Casey Hicks, who will be in charge of asking those questions of the panelists at the end. I also wanted to let you know that my dog gets a little feisty at night, and so I apologize in advance for any dog interruptions. Working from home, that's just sort of how it goes. So this event was inspired by an event or a paper that was put out by Yale on public opinion of clean energy. And so I have a presentation to start us kind of going through that paper, and then we have a guest with us to go over the lay of the land for clean energy in Wisconsin. And then we have two panelists to talk about sort of opinions of clean energy for conservatives and liberals across the state. And so that's sort of our agenda for tonight. I'm going to share my screen here with you. All right. All right, so just to start, this event is being hosted by Wisconsin Conservation Voters. I'm sure many of you are familiar with us, but if you're not, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit. We're based in Madison and have offices in Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Eau Claire. And our goal is to engage voters to protect Wisconsin's environment. We do that by working on state and local policies related to primarily clean water and clean energy, but also public lands and voter rights. And we also believe that as a way to do that, we get involved in elections to help elect conservation voters from conservation champions from both parties. So this is the paper that I mentioned. It's a paper that was put out by Yale, and it was published earlier this year. It surveyed people from all across the country, 966 registered voters, and found that 91% of the respondents supported a transition to 100% clean energy for one reason or another. And that finding really holds consistent with poll after poll across the country that tells us that Americans, no matter their party, support the development of clean energy. This is a graph from a Pew Research Center study from 2018. And in this Yale paper, they found that there are 4 key reasons why people supported the development of clean energy. The economic reason that clean energy has dramatically dropped in cost, that it is a financially smart decision to make, that it makes our country less financially reliant on foreign energy sources, and positions our families well economically for the future. Also, there's the obvious environmental benefit. It emits less carbon and is good for our health, and addresses issues of climate change. There's a third reason relating to religion and protecting God's creation. And then also fourthly, the political benefit of reducing political power of fossil fuel industries. So this study first sought to find kind of across the board why people supported clean energy. And the top reasons were around our health. That is consistent for both conservatives and liberals. And it really tends to make a lot of sense. And with Wisconsin conservation voters, we really fight for clean drinking water, clean air, and those, I think it's not surprising to us that those were the top two reasons why people supported clean energy. Then they broke it down based on kind of relative importance for Republicans and Democrats. This is not to say that, you know, this is ranking how much Republicans and Democrats support these issues compared to each groups, but it's rather ranking how they see how important each of these issues relative to the other issues. And so for Democrats, reducing global warming was one of the largest reasons why they support clean energy, whereas for Republicans, it was a lot lower on the scale. For Republicans, a lot of the reasons why they're supporting clean energy are economic related. And then like I said, there are some areas where Republicans and Democrats really share a lot of opinion around the protection of our air and our water and our health. So I thought this study was really interesting, and it's a question, this question of why we support clean energy, why Democrats and Republicans and conservatives and liberals support clean energy, and how we can better move forward together is a question that I get a lot from our members. And so after I saw this study come out, I thought, who can we have in Wisconsin talk about this issue in our state specifically. So we have a panel for you of clean energy experts to talk a little bit about this. First, we have Heather Allen, the Interim Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, a nonprofit organization which leads and accelerates the transformation to Wisconsin's renewable energy future through advocacy, education, and collaboration. We have Scott Coenen, who is the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, a nonprofit organization that launched in the fall of 2017, leading the effort in Wisconsin to provide a voice for conservatives in the state's energy policy debate with a focus on advancing clean, reliable, affordable, renewable energy. And lastly, we have Andrew Werthmann, who is a Wisconsin representative of the Democratic National Committee and has been a champion of clean energy policy on federal, state, and on the local level, including in his role as a city council member in the city of Eau Claire. Before we get started with the panelists, I also wanted to just sort of go over a set of community standards for this event. Obviously, you know, we live in a polarized time, and we're having an intentional conversation about a difference in opinion between Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals. And so I wanted to put this together to just sort of make sure that we all agree that this space is a respectful one. Obviously, disagreement will happen in this conversation. We intend it to, but respectful dialogue is still expected. We want to focus on our values and shared goals. The intent of this event is to find ways to bolster our transition to clean energy. It's going to be easier to do that when we're together by the end of this event, even if we start the conversation talking about our differences. Assume good intent. We're all here because we want to see more clean energy in Wisconsin's communities. And lastly, like I said before, please practice good webinar etiquette. Keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, and know that you're being recorded. So that's it from me. I am going to pass it off to Heather, who's going to speak a little bit about the lay of the land for clean energy in Wisconsin.
Hi everybody. I'm Heather Allen, and I am the Interim Executive Director. I'm going to go ahead and of Renew Wisconsin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Kate, let me know if this looks okay. Is that looking good?
Yep, that looks great, Heather.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective of the lay of the land in Wisconsin. Renewable energy. So Renew Wisconsin, we've been around since 1991. This is a photo of our small but nimble nonprofit. We've worked on wind, solar, biogas, electric vehicles, and even storage now. We've worked on renewable energy, all the big renewable energy decisions in the state of Wisconsin since 91. We've been there at every big decision, and we're excited that things are really now taking off. And the reason, of course, that we see so much growth in renewable energy is the dramatic drop in the cost of renewable energy. There are certainly the other incentives that Kate mentioned, protecting our air and water, reducing air pollution, reducing pollution that contributes to climate change. But the reason the industry is moving and the reason so many types of organizations can now use renewable energy is because it's affordable, and in many cases it's actually beating the cost of some fossil fuels, especially coal. Solar has come down 88% in the last 10 years, and wind has come down 69% in the last 10 years. And this is just a comparison really quick of the unsubsidized levelized cost of energy, so the cost per kilowatt hour of new wind, new solar, and new coal. And you can see that wind and solar are beating coal by, they cost less than half. So it's just really hard to argue those numbers. And as a result, we're seeing a number of corporations commit to renewable energy. These are big name corporations that have operations or ties to Wisconsin that have all made some level of renewable energy commitment. And their investments in renewable energy have helped to spur the market along as well. And I want to show you just a few of the very exciting large-scale wind and solar projects that have been approved or already been energized in Wisconsin, and what we can expect to see in the near future. This is a slide that shows the location of a number of small-scale solar farms. They're about 1 to 2 megawatts each. These are part of the Dairyland Power Cooperative investment in solar farms on the western side of the state. And that's the Public Service Commissioner, Tyler Hebner, at the Downsville Dunn Solar Farm, which is one of the Dairyland Power Cooperative projects. And those were among the first utility scale size projects to come online in Wisconsin. Since then, we've had very large projects approved. This slide mentions the Badger Hollow Solar Farm, which is in Iowa County, which has been approved and is starting to be under construction. The Richland County Solar Farm, that's just 50 megawatts, just north of the Badger Hollow Solar Farm, and that was approved. And Two Creeks Solar. These were all approved in April of last year. And since then, things have continued to march forward. This slide shows Point Beach up on Lake Michigan, and Badger State Solar in Jefferson County. That's sort of the middle star there. Were both approved, bringing another 249 megawatts of solar into the approved category. And then in Kenosha County, the 200 megawatt Paris Solar Farm is under review right now at the Public Service Commission. Also last year, we saw the Red Barn Wind Farm project get approved in Grant County. And here's a map that kind of shows you other future projects that we expect to see around the state. Today, all the rooftop solar, all these small scale solar farms that have already been built and energized, the solar on my house, the solar on your house, all together, that's about 130 megawatts of solar in Wisconsin. And what you're seeing on the project development queue here on this map is another 5,600 megawatts proposed. That is a dramatic increase in proposed solar production here in Wisconsin. Not all of these projects will get built, but it does show the level of interest that developers have in the state and the potential to power the state with renewable energy. You can also see we have a number of wind projects proposed and even some battery projects proposed, which are very exciting. So as these economic drivers align and as utilities feel the public pressure from folks like you really to change their portfolio, they've made a number of commitments to reduce their carbon emissions or to shift to renewables. This is the top utilities in the state serving the majority of customers in the state of Wisconsin. WEC, which is We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service together, has made an 80% carbon reduction commitment by 2050. Alliant has made an 80% carbon reduction commitment. Madison Gas and Electric and Xcel Energy have both made 100% net zero carbon or carbon free by 2050 goals. And then Dairyland Power and WPPI have made specific investments in renewable energy. These are really bold goals if you look at where we have been and where we are coming from. We're also seeing a great deal of growth in distributed solar, so solar on homes and businesses, and wind, distributed energy. But you know, residential customers are putting solar on their homes faster than ever. Things are growing really rapidly this year, actually, in Wisconsin, even with the pandemic happening. And one of the reasons for that is that solar is a really good investment. Obviously, it brings down your energy costs over time, but also it's an asset of value to your home. It can help your home sell faster and for a higher price without adding additional property tax burdens to your home, which is great. And then businesses can see a really fast return on investment when you combine all the tax credits and all the incentives and the way that they finance projects. This is an actual financial summary of a project that Hoffman Manufacturing in Dane County did for a 133 kilowatt system. Arch Electric was the installer, and they gave us permission to share these numbers. What started out as a $220,000 project up front actually will break even in year 4.5, year 5. And when all is said and done, we'll see that they have a tremendous cash flow over the lifetime of the project. So when a business leader can take a look at these numbers and see what that really means for their operating budget, it just makes sense. It just makes sense to go shift to renewables. And so we are seeing more and more businesses and large institutions do that. IKEA has a huge solar project, American Family Insurance has a huge solar project, and Madison College has the biggest in the state now on their rooftop. But that will be shortly overtaken by the Ashley Furniture solar investment, $29 million project, which would be the largest system in the state, and very exciting for that part of the state as well. Additional benefits that we see with renewable energy are, folks may have already seen this analysis, but an analysis came out not too long ago that we spend $14 billion on fossil fuels to power Wisconsin every year, and including transportation. And that is money we send out of the state, $14 billion. So every time we're able to shift away from a fossil fuel and invest in a renewable energy resource and keep that money circulating locally, we're really investing in our communities. So the more we can do that, the more economic benefits we have here in Wisconsin. There's also a specific direct benefit for communities that host solar farms and wind farms. This is an example of the municipal utility aid formula that is offered in lieu of property taxes for communities that host wind and solar farms, renewable energy projects. The Badger Hollow solar farm, which I mentioned earlier, that's a very large solar farm, 300 megawatts. For each megawatt, $4,000 total come back to the local governments. This is completely in addition to the landowner lease payments that the company that owns the project will be paying to the landowners. So this is in lieu of property taxes. And in the case of Badger Hollow, that will mean $1.2 million per year combined to the local government, the local county and township for 30 years, which is a huge boost to the local economy and can be spent really on whatever the local elected officials put in their budget. So that's a huge economic advantage. And then of course there are jobs. Before the coronavirus hit Wisconsin, there were 67,000 clean energy jobs in Wisconsin. And among the most rapidly growing were jobs in advanced transportation, wind, and storage. And these are real folks that really live and work in our communities. And investing in renewable energy helps promote these family sustaining jobs for a wide variety of people, and helps, really bolster our communities. So when you look at the big picture of renewable energy in Wisconsin, the future is bright. But what we need to do to make sure we can get to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050, or really any of the bold goals that have been set out by the utilities, is that we're going to need a number of project approvals. Those potential projects need to actually get built and approved and energized and start generating power so that we can take more coal and more fossil fuels offline. And we need to support policies that help customers, businesses, nonprofits, anyone who's buying electricity to generate their own electricity through solar on their property, or biogas or whatever renewable energy they're using. And then, of course, with coronavirus facing all of us and our communities, we need to find ways to stabilize the economic and health conditions that our communities are facing and that the industry is facing, and protecting the ability for the people who are building these projects and operating these projects to work and get things done. So that's just a quick overview of renewable energy in Wisconsin, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks to Wisconsin Conservation Voters for hosting, and to all the other speakers.
Thanks, Heather. If you could just unshare your screen for us. Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, Heather, for sort of setting the stage for us. I did want to let everyone know too that we will be sharing our slides along with other resources that may come up throughout the event. And so don't worry about trying to quickly take notes, because we'll be sharing these resources that are in front of you. So another quick reminder to message your questions to Casey Hicks in the message box, and we will be asking them at the end of the event. So I want to turn to the panelists. We have Scott Coenen and Andrew Werthmann. We have a couple of questions for them to start off. So first question, this is for both of you. As I said, poll after poll is showing us that a majority of conservatives and liberals across the country support clean energy. But we know that conservatives and liberals generally support clean energy for different reasons, like we learned in the Yale study. In your experience working with your respective communities in Wisconsin, why do the people you work with support clean energy? We'll start with Scott.
Okay.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so just by way of a quick introduction, I know Kate kind of wanted to keep this conversational and keep it interesting. So I just wanted to, I'll answer the question, I think, in maybe just a brief introduction of why I'm here and how I came to actually be here. I'm a conservative, so I'm maybe a little bit outnumbered on this phone call, on this call a little bit, but maybe a little fish out of water on this one. But I have been involved in right of center politics at the state level in Wisconsin for 10 plus years, since I was a college Republican back in my college days. And I tell people that this is an odd place for me to be. Supportive of clean energy, supportive of renewable energy. Despite the polling numbers, and I know they often come across very positive, this is not the status quo position for conservatives or for Republicans. It is not. So it takes education, it takes outreach, and it takes real effort to talk to people about these technologies, about what's happening in the marketplace. I have advanced, for the last 10 years, I have been arguing against renewable energy strenuously. I have advanced a lot of the arguments that you guys probably would hate to hear come out of my mouth at this point. But I think probably the most persuasive argument that I had made in my last 10 years was that renewable energy is expensive. It is not ready for prime time. It does not work on a grid without very expensive and inefficient tax credits, government mandates that have very, very large unintended consequences. I have advanced a lot of those arguments. The reason that I am here is to hit on Heather's presentation. The economics have changed. The market has fundamentally changed. The technology has allowed us this opportunity to actually bridge what I think is a political gap. And that is absolutely tremendous. So to answer your question a little bit, Kate, I think shifting from an argument over climate change, an argument over subsidies, an argument over mandates, the argument that we've been having the last 10, 20, 30 years, it needs to change on both sides. Now, particularly, I think right of center, but it needs to change on both sides. And the things that we emphasize when we talk about renewable energy, it needs to be about falling price, it needs to be about versatility, it needs to be about rural economic development, because this stuff is going to be huge in outstate Wisconsin. It can be about business and consumer choice, as Heather touched on. And at the end of the day, one of the things that is, I think, really the biggest issue, and we don't often talk about it at the state level, the national security implications of these technologies are tremendous, and they are almost universally upside to the United States of America from a geopolitical perspective. So all of those things are just bread and butter, I think, conservative issues. But man, we share a lot of common ground between left and right on a lot of those issues. So again, from my perspective, I don't know that we have a lot of outreach and a lot of education to do on the right side of the aisle on these issues, absolutely. But also from a left perspective, I think it would help to change the conversation, to change the way people approach this issue a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, for having us in the Conservation Voters as well, and thank you all for joining this call. And you know, I appreciate Scott, your words as well. And you know, kind of looking at this issue with fresh eyes and thinking about what the future holds in terms of clean energy. By way of background, I serve as a city council member here in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and I have previously worked for a national nonprofit actually on issues around clean energy. And I also serve as a member of the Democratic National Committee and have been an advocate in my local community for trying to encourage more clean energy and more resiliency. So, you know, I think one of the things that I kind of want to point out is that the clean energy has really been something that is not new on folks' radar. I think these technologies have been talked about since the 60s and 70s as being, you know, really offering a lot of potential for our country, how we become more energy independent, how we lower our costs, how we integrate an energy that comes to us for free. It's renewable in that we constantly have it. And so I think that those concepts are not new. We're talking about 40 or 50 years that folks have been trying to encourage more use of these technologies. Now, while Scott is right that it has taken a fair amount of public engagement in order and government mandate in order to encourage and incentivize more clean energy. The fact of the matter is that for the past 110 years, our coal and oil and all fossil fuel technologies have been subsidized by the federal government. And so I think one of the arguments that I've been a part of for the last 10 to 15 years is that clean energy ought to have parity in terms of the support and incentives that it gets from the federal government. So as an example, technologies like combined heat and power, which can utilize industrial energy efficiency, geothermal, some battery storage technologies, biofuels get a lot less tax credits than do things like solar and wind, depreciation of mining operations, coal, oil exploration, et cetera. So I think there's a strong argument to be made that all of these energies ought to be given an opportunity and to be on the same footing. I think, one thing is that people who have been advocating for clean energy for the past number of decades have been talking about it from, I think, a resiliency and economic development and I would say probably a cost standpoint. But I think one of the realities of this conversation is now the fact that because of carbon emissions that are going into our atmosphere by using fossil fuels, we are now faced with a changing and severe weather. That is a fact that we're seeing in Wisconsin. Whether it's my family's farm that has trouble growing crops because the fields are now covered with water, the fact that we have seen a 27% increase in rainfall in the southern part of our state in Madison area over the last decade, whether it is drier conditions in some areas of our state that don't allow crops to grow, or whether it's our logging industry that has been impacted by actually the warming days of winter and an inability to get logs out. These are the things that our state is now being impacted by, and I think the conversation is now, and I think it's bipartisan, but it's recognizing that we need to turn away from having carbon emissions being put into our atmosphere because it does impact our way of life. And so those things are tied together to me. We can have further conversation about that, but I think it's worth noting that there's this additional recognition that that our changing climate is another reason why we need to be moving to 100% carbon-free energy.
Kate, I don't know if you want to do some back and forth right now, or you want to wait a little while? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so based on just from what Andrew was saying, two things that I think I disagree with a little bit, Andrew, just in my experience kind of talking with conservatives about this issue. Number one, I think it's not productive to get into a fossil fuels versus renewables debate, because that entrenches a lot of people. Whether I like it or not, a lot of Republicans and a lot of conservatives view fossil fuels, coal miners, oil and gas wildcatters in Texas, they view that with a bootstrap mentality, and they view it as their energy, right? Quote unquote, our kind of energy. That's the energy we're comfortable with, and it's the energy we're used to lobbying on behalf of. I've seen that debate go, and to me it's not productive. Just one point on that. I think it's far better to get into a discussion with people about the positives, the unmitigated positives of renewables, as opposed to getting into an us versus them conversation over fossil fuels. So as you guys go out and talk to some folks, just keep that in mind, please, just from my one perspective. And number two, I can't emphasize this enough. I understand that there are some shifting dynamics in the climate change debate, especially nationally, but climate change tied to renewable energy has been a bad thing, I think, for renewables. It has held back the renewable discussion for a long time. I cannot tell you the second that I bring up climate change or someone else brings up climate change in a county Republican Party meeting or a meeting that I'm trying to talk with, climate change sucks all the air out of the room in a discussion. And it makes it borderline impossible for me to even touch on renewables and touch on all of the other things that are so positive that's happening in the renewable energy industry, the positives that flow from renewables, all of the common ground that I think we share that renewables actually get us to. Bringing up climate change becomes a discussion about climate change. And that to me has been really, really unproductive when I talk in front of conservative circles.
All right, thanks guys. You know, when we think about the people in this event and people beyond who want to go out into their communities and talk about clean energy with random strangers and their friends and family, what are some things that you both think that both conservatives and liberals can agree on when it comes to clean energy? And when somebody's talking about clean energy, what's an issue that is, I think, maybe universally agreed upon that they can talk about in the community?
If I could shoot first on that. So, you know, I think one thing that has really, you know, and full disclosure, you know, my past work has, I've actually worked more with Republican members of Congress than I have Democrats on looking at how does our country waste less energy. The fact of the matter is that right now, we send up enough heat energy in this country to power the entire country of Japan. That is through different industrial processes, through the generation of electricity. We waste an entire an amount of electricity that could power the entire country of Japan. So what we have been focused on is the fact that, especially in times of natural disasters, when we have hurricanes hitting our coasts, when we have even, you know, pandemics, for example, the idea of being energy secure and having energy that is in our own communities, that is, you know, essentially, I would say strengthened by our own local utilities, or whether it's, for example, some of our biggest energy users like industrial energy, creating their own hospitals that can create their own energy, district energy systems. To me, I think from my experience, Republicans and Democrats alike seem to agree that that is the kind of clean energy strategy a diversified grid can create, and that we need to be more secure.
Yeah, so I would agree with Andrew on that one. The localized nature of renewable energy, and particularly solar, the fact that the technology scales down to, you know, one solar panel on the side of a barn, that is that is a shared value, and I think conservatives can definitely appreciate that. One of the sneaky issues that I think I'm most excited about personally, and I find that a lot of people are excited about, is the individuality of some of these technologies. I tell people, sometimes I'm talking to you know, some very prepper people, right? People that are hiding out in the bunker right now and are, you know, eating the big vats of canned vegetables and everything. There's an individuality streak amongst a lot of conservatives. And I can't tell you how excited some people are when I start to explain, you know, the concept of generating your own electricity on your own property, and then maybe tying in some battery storage or an energy storage mechanism that you own, and then maybe having an electric vehicle parked in your car that both gives and receives energy. Those three things working in concert with each other, they could offer us the ability to not have to rely on our utility anymore. And that makes, I think that crosses a lot of political boundaries. It scrambles a lot of things politically, but I find that individuals are often really, really excited about that.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned the preppers, Scott, because I was watching that show recently, and it's funny because it's like, yeah, we've got this armored vehicle and we've got our, you know, semi-automatic weapons, and we've got our solar panels ready to go. You know, it's kind of funny because it kind of comes together. So
It's been slow to catch on, but I hear that conversation more and more. And I think, you know, as solar as I disagree sometimes. You know, people say these technologies have been around for a long time, and probably I'm 2 or 3 years into this, in all honesty, folks. So I'm new to this battle, and a lot of you have, you know, spent years fighting this battle over renewables. But I honestly, I view solar in particular as a breakthrough new technology. The industrial scale that we're using it at, the economies of scale that we have through manufacturing globally, this is all new, and the price point for individuals. When you start to see, you know, solar panels go up on your neighbor's house, start to see it happen in practice around you and at real capacity, to me that's a new technology, and then you can start to get to a point where people are a little bit more comfortable with it, and I'm excited for that prospect.
Great, thanks, guys. So the next question is, while both parties certainly have not historically had perfect track records and platforms when it comes to clean energy, the current political climate is that we're seeing more support for clean energy among Democrats in the state of Wisconsin and also federally. So why do you think that is, and how do we get legislators from both parties to support clean energy policy as broadly as voters do?
You know, I think we may have some disagreement on this point, but I think the fact of the matter is that our politics has a lot of money in it, and far too much, and that actually extends both sides of the aisle, in my opinion. That money plays far too large of a role in deciding who is elected and what issues they fight for. And however it has been, you know, I think in recent years, we've really seen that the oil and gas industry, fossil fuel industry, pours a lot of money into lobbying, into electing people, into changing policy. And for the most part, they have found, you know, and they do for both parties, but I think they have probably found more of a home, you know, in the Republican Party. And so I think, you know, when you look at some of the values that Democrats have been championing, you know, I think some of the reasons that were mentioned before in terms of thinking about our pollution issues, our environment, and making sure that we're preserving and conserving our environment, are issues that have naturally been a part of Democratic politics. Now, I think there's a lot of back and forth on this, though, too. I think there's shared common ground potentially, but I do think that we have to be honest about the amount of money that these industries are able to, you know, to pour into our politics. Unfortunately, I think as Scott and I have been talking, I think moving forward, though, I do think that that there is a public demand for clean energy that is far outpacing the amount of money that you know, some of these industries can pour into this. And we saw it here in Eau Claire. We had just grassroots support. People were surveyed and said, we would like, this was roughly 8-9 years ago, we would like our utility to move to more renewable energy. For whatever reason, you know, we would like that to happen. And I think that there's a groundswell of support. Some people, it may be because they're concerned about climate change. Some people, it may be because they're concerned about energy independence. Some people, it's simply that they would like to see their local economy receive the money that is put into energy. Whatever the reason is, I think that our politics is starting to respond to really grassroots support and grassroots demand for more clean energy that is outpacing and stronger than even what fossil fuel industries are able to do.
Yeah, so I won't disagree with Andrew. Every day I see right of center think tanks, right of center organizations that are what I would count as needlessly hostile to renewables at this point, and are relying on 10-year-old talking points to deal with renewables. Our whole approach to talking with Republicans is, right now, I think our party largely is at a position of status quo. We defend the status quo. We are pessimistic toward innovation, pessimistic toward what I think is fundamentally a good thing in the marketplace, innovation and new technologies, and moving Republicans in a direction where they can embrace that innovation more. That is the central challenge that I deal with every day, and that's hard to do. I think number one for a lot of folks, especially when you're dealing with your state legislator, especially on the Republican side, that there isn't a one unifying motivating factor to talk about renewables. There is on the left, right? It's climate and environmental concern. You all are passionate about this on this call right now. I would imagine for that reason, and that leads you to talk to your legislators, leads you to talk to your representatives about this issue. So Democratic state representatives get talked about all the time about these issues, and they're more knowledgeable about it than right of center lawmakers are for that reason. So recognizing that there's not necessarily a groundswell reason on right of center to talk to your representative about these things, how do you break through? And recognize then that your state representative, if they're a Republican, probably doesn't know that in the last 5 years, solar and wind are competitive at a cost basis. Probably has no idea that electric vehicles are so widespread right now amongst all automakers. It's not just an Elon Musk and Tesla thing. Probably has no idea that battery storage is on the cusp of actually entering the marketplace at industrial scale. These things are not well known. Right of center, and they're not well known even to some of our statewide leaders. And when they are known, sometimes they get covered up by a lot of other things. I spend a lot of time answering questions over the life cycle of solar panels, what you do with wind turbines when they fall apart. I deal with questions around variability of renewable energy. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. So there are a lot of other issues besides that, but start from a base that your state legislator probably doesn't know some of the fundamental things that are happening in the marketplace in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think Scott makes a really good point. It's not just your state legislators. I mean, a lot of even people that are connected in the energy space may not have an understanding of how these dynamics have changed, whether it's your local, your cooperative energy or even your larger utility. I can remember just 5 years ago, even having conversations with our utility, and numbers being thrown out that were already different from what was actually the case in terms of the affordability of these technologies. So I think that kind of that education piece goes a long way to encouraging legislators, both Republicans and Democrats, to continue to be supportive of these policies.
And to go off of that, what Andrew's saying, the central challenge again for our organization, you have a central constituency left of center that wants to see action on the environment, wants to see action on climate. What does that group look like on the Republican side? It's not motivated by climate. It's not motivated, by environmental concerns necessarily. What is the big motivating factor that can get a lot of conservatives together on this issue and elevate that concern and that passion upwards, right, to the state level and to the national level? And that's how you get action typically, grassroots up, right? That's a tough question to crack.
One thing, if I could just add to that, is we actually worked with Iraq war veterans and a number of organizations, veterans organizations, that their message was simple, which was, we put our lives on the line protecting oil reserves and tankers in Iraq. And they came home and they said, why should I die on the side of an oil rig in Iraq when there's a better way to do this? In fact, one of the things we found a lot of support in is with the U.S. military. The U.S. military is one of the leaders in researching and implementing clean energy technologies, including things like biofuels for their jets, looking at how to do solar installations in bases, things that can essentially encourage more security for our country. And our organization worked with veterans, specifically in Washington, D.C., meeting with, we met with both aisles, but Republican members of Congress really understood this message that, this is about our security and our long-term, looking after our interest as a country. And so I think that's another way to kind of look at this.
So, Scott, then, what would an ideal conservative clean energy bill look like to you?
Yeah. So without getting too much into, way too needless details, I guess, a 30,000-foot view, I often tell, again, Republicans need to come back to the center on this to find a pragmatic middle ground. But I also think left of center politicians probably need to recognize that, the tools that have often been used to push renewable energy forward, the policy tools, are not necessarily going to be the correct policy now that the market has changed. Going forward, I think renewables in a competitive marketplace, and now that they're the cheapest, lowest cost option, the policy menu, if you will, probably needs to change a little bit to reflect that. And I don't know if either side is really caught up to that dynamic quite yet. So the long story short, we don't know. We really don't know what a conservative clean energy bill looks like. There have been some attempts at this. An Energy Bill of Rights or an Energy Freedom Act in South Carolina, just over the border in Minnesota. The Senate Republican caucus has released a Clean Energy First package of legislation. And there's all sorts of different components that kind of involve that. I think in Wisconsin, to kind of do some 30,000-foot view, real big cornerstones, we need to look at policy that helps utilities and helps ratepayers retire old assets that are not going to make money back. We have a lot of money and a lot of momentum tied up in old fossil fuel infrastructure that is going to need to go away. Somebody is going to have to pay for that and pick up that tab, and there are policy items that we can deploy to make that easier on both utilities, ratepayers, and stakeholders in general. I am very excited about the opportunity around distributed generation in this state. We're going to have to make a choice in Wisconsin whether we want utilities to dominate the solar marketplace, or if we want a competitive private marketplace in solar. As a conservative, as somebody who believes in the free market, the choice there is really, really clear. I do not want my regulated monopoly utility to expand into any more marketplaces than it has to. So we have to get the policy right around that. But those are some, bread and butter, I think. Those are issues that I think are natural conservative issues. It's reform, right? It's cutting red tape. It's regulatory reform. Things that we've traditionally been very comfortable with, just applied to renewable energy, an issue that we're not very comfortable talking about.
So Andrew, same question to you. What would an ideal liberal clean energy policy look like?
I think first and foremost is that, I think we have to put a price on carbon and actually recognize the role that I think the private market could play. We're looking at an industrial world where 40 countries have already started to put a price on carbon. Many cities are looking at this as well. And what it does is it says that if you are utilizing carbon, then you essentially have to bear that cost out. But it also means that that you have the opportunity in a free marketplace to essentially figure out how you are going to mitigate that. And I think until we are serious about that, one of the things that could happen is both training and implementation of more clean energy, whether we need to retrain people into different jobs, whether we need to look at setting up infrastructure or grids that accommodate a clean energy economy. But in my mind, that's, I think, where our country is going to have to look. And I think, I hope that we're not last in that, that we're actually able to kind of take the lead in the world, because otherwise I think we will be left behind in this conversation. So I think that's first and foremost for me. And I think a second thing is looking at how do we, set a goal for ourselves. I mean, this is one thing where if as a country, when we've set a goal for ourselves and said, look, by this time we're going to put a person on the moon, or by this time, we want to have a carbon-free, clean energy economy. I think that's important, because what it does is it helps direct our agencies, our resources, our academic focus toward a goal. And here in Eau Claire, we've actually implemented a goal of 100% clean energy by the year 2050 and carbon net neutrality. That, along with many other municipalities in our region, has actually helped encourage our utility, Xcel Energy, to work closely with us on similar goals. They have also implemented, I believe, one of the strongest goals toward clean energy in the country. And Xcel Energy is one of the biggest companies, utility companies. So, I think that's kind of part of it, is probably having a goal is important for our country and important for our state to set, and that helps us kind of think through, how it is we can move in that direction. Now, I think we have to remember that so many people work in the energy economy that is not clean energy, and I think we have to be very, very cognizant and clear that as a transition is going to take place, and it will take place over the next 10, 20, and 30 years, that we are not leaving behind people, who are mining coal, who are putting up, power lines out to, a generation station, whatever the job is, that we're actually being mindful of the fact that, we're going to need to bring everyone forward on this. So in my mind, I think a clean energy legislation has to take into account the transition that we're seeing, because otherwise I think there's going to be huge resistance, and it's also a lot of people will not be benefiting from those changes. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of things, but those are the kinds of things that I would like to see in comprehensive and holistic energy legislation.
Just one thing to add to that too, Kate. Wisconsin is behind everybody in the Midwest at this point, right? Over the border in Iowa, they're getting 40% of their electricity right now from wind generation, at a utility scale. Minnesota is at something like 25-30% renewables, both wind and solar. Michigan, Illinois, Indiana even is ahead of, Indiana and Ohio are ahead of where Wisconsin is. I find it's politicians of both stripes do not like to be behind other states that are their neighboring states. And that's a really, really good messaging tool and a really good thing for people to bring up. There are specific reasons. There are policy and legislative reasons why our state is held back right now in the development of a renewable marketplace. And often the solutions to those problems are in the weeds, sure, deep in the weeds, but they are not explicitly political at this point. So I would, urge everybody on the call. We don't like being behind Minnesota on many things, and this is one of them we're behind.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one more question. Just a quick reminder to the audience, if you have questions that you'd like to ask of the panelists, please be sure to send them to Casey. We have one more planned question, and then we'll get to your audience questions after that. So this last question is for Scott and Andrew and Heather. So feel free to just jump in, the three of you, with answers. So together, what are some real next steps and actions that we can all take to build support for clean energy among conservative and liberal voters and elected officials in Wisconsin?
If it's all right, I'll jump in here. This is Heather. Listening to Andrew and Scott, I'm hearing a lot of themes emerge, themes where we have bipartisan agreement I mean, the issue of competition, I think you're right, Scott, that talking about competition and how what Wisconsin needs to do to be competing with its neighbors is really compelling for both Republican and Democratic audiences. You know, there was a report by ELPC about Wisconsin and Minnesota on renewable energy, and it got a lot of coverage because, you know, we compare basketball statistics, we compare football statistics, and if we're comparing energy statistics, we're just losing. And that's an important rivalry for us. So I think competition, and Andrew mentioned workforce. I mean, the Republicans actually brought forth a workforce energy training bill this session for clean energy, but it didn't end up going anywhere, in part because of the coronavirus and everything got waylaid. But there are areas of agreement here, and energy independence and the cost. I mean, those four things are really strong commonalities that we all share. So, I mean, I think the first thing is talking about those with people, writing letters to the editor, highlighting those shared values that most Wisconsinites have, whatever side of the aisle they're on. I think that's really important. And then, you know, honestly, what Renew is really focused on is just, we are at this perfect moment where the costs are so low. There are still some tax subsidies to take advantage of. We have momentum in the state. If we can just get projects done, like project after project done, we can shift to renewable energy. You know, there are certainly policies that need to be improved, but, you know, training our workforce, building the projects, that is what is actually going to get us to a renewable energy future. And so supporting those projects is important. You know, going to your local city council, going to your county board when a project is up for discussion and saying, you know, I support renewable energy and I hope you will vote for this. It has a lot of benefits. We need those voices in the room because a lot of those decisions are actually made at the local level. And we need your support to get those projects adopted, and then helping organizations shift to renewables, put solar on their own properties, go geothermal. There's lots of training and technical grants and resources, and Renew is certainly there to help find those. But if you have a partner in your community who's like, oh, I'd be interested in renewable, I'm not sure how to get there, that's what we're here for. I mean, we really think we're at the moment now where we just need to build a number of wins and keep the momentum strong, and we can get there.
Yeah, and I'll just second a few of those things. I think it's incredible to look at what has happened over the past decade in the clean energy space. It is, you know, it's nothing short of a revolution to see how much, you know, these technologies have advanced, how much policy has advanced, how much people's opinions have grown and moved forward. It is truly incredible. And I think it really, for all of the reasons that you showed on those early slides, Kate, it really is something that is going to make our country stronger and more resilient into the future, regardless of why you support it. You know, I think it will bring those benefits. And, you know, I think I would like to kind of go back to what Heather was talking about in terms of so much of this, you know, and it's, people say it, but it's absolutely true that so much of this comes from the grassroots. It really is about, you know, public opinion. I mean, I just remember this transition with Xcel Energy here in our own community, where we as a community, in groups that were interested in getting more clean energy, said, well, we would like to do a survey of our entire community to see, you know, and do it through our city, but to see what level of support there is for clean energy. You know, Xcel Energy kind of picked up the ball and ran with it and did their own surveying and found that, in fact, people want, you know, these changes for all the different reasons that were mentioned before, whether it's pollution, or whether it's, you know, they want to spend their dollars more locally, you know, whatever it is. And so, but those changes from the grassroots come because of education and activity from folks like yourself and from organizations that are involved. and from you, talking to your neighbor and doing all those things. Like, that's how public opinion changes. And frankly, and this is something that it's not just a Republican issue, it's a Democrat issue, which is that we don't have enough leaders willing to just go out on a limb and do this in elected office. They need to be pushed and forced from people to actually do the right thing, whether it's Democrat or Republican. That's what it really takes. No one likes to kind of step out and sort of be in that vulnerable space without having the political backing to do it. And I think that's kind of the reality on the ground. So coming back to that is, your energy, your passion, your work is really what moves this along. And I think everyone else that is either elected or business leaders, they kind of take, they kind of follow that wagon, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's kind of the important piece of this.
Two things really quickly, and I won't take a lot of time because I'd like to, get to your guys' questions. Number one, meet people where they are on this issue, period. Talk their language. And I beg people, please don't try and make converts out of people. Just meet them where they are on this. Number two, I think the really, really realist thing anybody can do right now is support a renewable energy project in your own backyard, in your own community, in your own part of the state. Like the number one problem with wind development in the state of Wisconsin is local opposition, period. And that local opposition is not political. It is, I would characterize it as NIMBY, but there are other things, certainly other concerns that are, very legitimate local concerns there. But that's the number one problem in the state of Wisconsin with wind development, local opposition. So if you can stand up and there's a project in your backyard that you have the opportunity to support vocally, that is the realest thing anybody on this call or anybody in the state of Wisconsin can do in support of renewable energy right now.
Great. Well, thanks, panelists. I don't know about you all, but that was super, super interesting. And I think even more, I think this is the kind of conversation that will help us move the clean energy conversation forward. I've always believed that we have a lot of work to do to forward the development of clean energy, and we can't do it with one party. We need everybody. And so to better understand how our neighbors are thinking and supporting clean energy for just different reasons, I think is a first step in doing that. So we're going to move to audience Q&A next. Casey has been collecting questions for us. Casey is the Northeast organizer for Wisconsin conservation voters. So Casey, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Kate. So we have got a lot of questions and not a lot of time. So just letting you know right away, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but a lot of them have been kind of in the same vein, the same subject. So I'm going to try my best to combine the ones that fit together. But generally speaking, we've gotten a lot of questions about rural Wisconsin, and a lot of the state, of course, is rural. And so from both of your perspectives, what policy can we begin to put into place to make sure that rural communities aren't being left behind and that they're seeing the financial benefits of a transition over to clean energy?
So I think I'll try and take a stab at that real quick. Oddly enough, one of the biggest advantages the state of Wisconsin has in utility scale rural renewable energy development right now is that there is a mechanism that sends projects for final approval up to the Public Service Commission. I think you guys, folks in Eau Claire and kind of Western Wisconsin have seen some local opposition bubble up to a wind project in Southern Eau Claire County there. And I think if, again, oddly enough, if we had local control entirely over that project might not end up going forward. So there are some very weird dynamics where I think sometimes the local opposition overcrowds some of the huge benefits financially that can accrue to rural areas of the state and when it comes to renewable energy development. I think in a lot of cases, rural Wisconsin is largely ag-based. Politically, it's typically very red, right? So I hear a lot of the same themes. And I think initially when people are approached or hear about, a 4,000 acre or 3,500 to 3,000 acre solar farm going in their township, they fall back again on things that were true 10 years ago, or the arguments that they have, the preconceived notions that they had 10 years ago. And that colors a lot of the opposition that moves forward on a project. People decide whether or not they're going to support something based off of their preconceived notions and what they thought was true 10 years ago. And that can be really, really deadly. I think it's a combination of old talking points and local opposition. And it really, really hurts. It hurts renewable energy projects, especially in rural areas sometimes. So the best thing I think, again, you guys can do is update people on these changes, shift the way they think and the facts that they have available to them, and challenge their preconceived notions on some of these things, because there's obviously a lot of changes that are taking place.
Yeah, I honestly don't know a lot about what, for example, if you look at Iowa and the amount of wind energy that has been integrated into their rural areas. I mean, I would assume that they've got probably some sort of, an overarching way of doing land use planning and zoning, as well as siting laws that people can kind of agree to. Like my dad has talked about how he could, potentially do windmills on the farm. But at the same time, I know in a second, there's going to be people in that area who are not going to appreciate, even though it's over his cows, they're not going to appreciate, having windmills so close. So it's one of those things where I think we probably have to get a handle on a more comprehensive way of looking at, like, how do we cite these? What are the setbacks? What can people agree on? And in Eau Claire, this, in our community, which is mostly urban, we've actually taken these laws seriously and thought about, okay, how do we make it easier to get solar up, and how do we make it easier for if you want to put a windmill up? There has to be certain setbacks and things like that. So those are some of the things that I think we have to think through and encourage more of. And not everyone is going to agree. Even when you have that law in place, like, not everyone is probably going to agree, but hopefully it drives that conversation forward.
One of the disadvantages that Wisconsin has from a rural perspective is that we're actually not that rural compared to some other states. I've talked to large-scale wind and solar developers who they do projects in the Dakotas, they do projects in western Minnesota, and they'll have 1,000 acres and they'll deal with 2 landowners. In Wisconsin, for 1,000 acres, you're going to deal with 300 different landowners. And that exponentially complicates the project every single time. So there's some interesting dynamics in Wisconsin that, as compared to other states, that really complicate the rural aspect of the development sometimes.
And if I can jump in here on renewables, I'd like to just flash back to, can I share my screen actually, Kate?
Sure.
Okay. I'm just gonna flash back to my couple slides here. When rural communities are looking at renewable energy, here's a slide about the per megawatt value of solar, for example. So this is all brand new money. In a number of cases, the tax dollars that this property was bringing to the local government was like minimal, well under thousands of dollars, or in the hundreds of dollars range, if not less. And because the land was not at a high tax rate. And so if you can bring a new source of $1 million of revenue to your local government, and then also pay the landowners a lease payment that is oftentimes double or more what you could lease the land to another farmer for, then you're bringing in new investment in your community, and it can protect farmers. A number of farmers who have shifted to putting part of their land into wind or solar are doing it so that they can protect the family farm and ensure that they have a drought-resistant crop for 30 years, and that they can make sure that their kids can inherit the land because they don't have to worry about selling it if there's a downturn, extreme weather events, or there's a trade tariff, or there's a coronavirus and the whole supply chain gets disrupted, all of those things have happened in the last 2 years to farmers in Wisconsin. And there is nothing as stable and secure as this solution to protect farmers and their land. So, and the other thing I wanted to show you really quick was that map of where these projects are going. These projects, unlike, oops, I moved too quickly. Whoa. These projects, unlike the projects that for large scale coal or nuclear, these projects are scattered widely from east to west across the state. There are projects in the north, a lot of projects in the south. These are projects in rural communities that bring clean energy and major economic investment to those communities that have never had the opportunity to benefit from the economic investment and jobs of energy at all before, right? So, I mean, the benefits to rural communities, financial benefits are tremendous. So if anyone wants to talk more about that, we have a lot on our website, a lot of facts about solar farms and wind farms, and what if you want to lease your land for solar, or how do I get something in my community? We're happy to help. There's just a lot of great news here for rural communities.
Heather, do you want to leave yourself unmuted just in case you want to jump in on the next
Sure.
question too?
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So another question that we got, you all touched on it a little bit before about workforce and making sure that people aren't left behind in a transition to clean energy. And of course, if we're going to be building solar installations, wind turbines, we're going to need people who know how to do it. So what are policies that we can be putting into place to make sure that people are being retrained, or that we're training the next generation of workers to assist in transitioning to clean energy?
I'm happy to jump in on this. There's a number of technical colleges around Wisconsin that are training, and the Midwest Renewable Energy Association that are doing all kinds of training for solar installers, wind operators, and there's opportunities for more specialized training for biogas and biodigesters and things like that. But they're actually wonderful programs, and there's even a solar core partially funded by a Department of Energy grant with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. So so this bill that had been developed and it didn't end up going anywhere, but still could, in the future go somewhere, is directing some state funding for workforce training to focus on renewable energy training. And so policies like that are wonderful and perfect start. There are a lot of students who are interested in these types of programs, or people. We've actually even been talking about, if you can do some online training to be a solar installer during the coronavirus, if you can't go to work, maybe that's a perfect time to be getting a new skill set for a growing industry. So, I mean, there's just a number of options. That's one of the most exciting places to be. There's actually some programs that cities are doing as well. The city of Madison is doing its own solar job training program, and they bring in folks, and they target diverse communities and diverse applicants. And the city of Madison has been doing its own solar installation. So they literally just bring people onto the job and do apprenticeships with them and show them how to, get up on the rooftop and do the layout and do the electrical and get going. And those people are then getting hired by private solar installers. There's a lot of great opportunities.
If anybody is interested in looking at that into that bill, it's Wisconsin bill. It's Assembly Bill 237, and essentially it's a bill that directs existing money through the Fast Forward training program in the state of Wisconsin, and through the Department of Workforce Development. Essentially, it creates a table and it creates some money to get all of the industry stakeholders and the state of Wisconsin through the Department of Workforce Development all at the same table to talk about what the needs are going to be for the industry, and whether we're in a position to meet them or not. Because that conversation hasn't necessarily been happening in the state of Wisconsin, and we're going to need it to happen. But I think one of the larger points, we have existing infrastructure to train people, but I think young people we need to tell them that this is a growth industry. that there is an opportunity here, that they should be interested in getting a a wind technician degree or solar installer, start their own solar business. There's huge opportunity here, economic opportunity, and I'm just not sure that maybe the younger generations are looking at this as an opportunity, and that's the fault of a lot of folks, but I think we need to do a better job of telling them this is a real thing, and you could make some very, very good money and have a very, very good life doing this stuff.
And I think it's, to add to that, I think one of the things we have to remember is that even as we transition to more clean energy, so many of the jobs are actually the same jobs that existed before. So you think about, construction jobs around, assembling, whether it's a solar garden, a solar farm. You think about the linesmen and everyone who puts up transmission equipment. So a lot of these are jobs that are already there and going to transition essentially, but are probably going to need training as well. So like everyone who gets up on your roof to put new solar panels on are going to need to be trained, to do that safely and to do that the way it has to be done. And so, while electricians may be different now, than they are in 10 years or those kinds of things, I think we have to remember that many of these jobs will, essentially be the same jobs transitioning.
Well, thank you all. So we have time for probably one more question, but it's specifically for Scott. So one person asked you, Scott, how can we present solar as a possibility to conservatives without the risk of them thinking that you're a closet liberal or anything along those lines? And are there any other talking points beyond the financial benefits that you've used or that you can use as a conservative with fellow conservatives?
Yeah, good luck. I don't know if I'm a closet liberal now or not, or what. No, I think first and foremost, especially when it comes to solar, the economic benefits are there. I mean, I think if you were to put that, the chart of the graph that Heather had with that business with the savings, the return on investment after 4 years, 30-year life frame, accumulated savings, that's tremendous. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that would argue with that, period. Regardless of your political affiliation. But, I would really, I would urge people to go with the independence message too. I mean, it's real. And again, that kind of crosses, political lines a little bit, but I don't know a lot of people that like their utility. Cooperatives may be different, but I think that there's a real opportunity for us to message and talk to conservatives about, the kind of the rugged individualism, kind of the American spirit, American exceptionalism, and the idea of being truly independent on your own land, your own property. There's a property rights aspect of it too that I think speaks really strongly to conservatives. So yeah, I'm partial to the numbers and I'm partial to the dollar signs, but I recognize that it doesn't trip everybody's trigger. But I would go with independence and trying to advance that message to folks a little bit as well. And as far as not being a closet liberal, my gosh, it's difficult. I will admit that there have been times where I've gone in front of audiences that have accused me of being, a liberal mole, or being paid for by somebody, or why could I possibly be here talking about this and with this message? It's difficult, but I think if you come across to people earnest, and if you're honest, I think it matters. And to be honest, I think we spend a lot of our time just focusing on the positives of something. And I think it builds credibility when you can recognize that there are some drawbacks to whatever technology you're talking about. This is not just all positive. There are some cons that we're going to deal with in a transition to cleaner energy. And I think it helps to be honest with people and recognize the pros, recognize the cons, and have a real conversation. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps a lot. And I don't believe you're a closet liberal, so no worries.
Thank you.
So that is all the time that we have. I wish we could have gotten to all the questions in the chat box. Thank you everyone for sending them. But it is 7:26 and time to wrap up. As we wrap things up, I did want to point you all to a new resource that Wisconsin Conservation Voters created in partnership with Renew Wisconsin and the Sierra Club, the Clean Energy Toolkit, which is a resource for local elected officials and local clean energy advocates to find local policies and funding solutions for clean energy. So I will be sending that resource to everybody who attended. We'll also be sending an article that highlighted the Yale study that we talked about at the beginning of this presentation, as well as the slides from Heather and myself. So expect a follow-up email from me. If you want to go back and watch this event again or send it to somebody, it will be posted on Facebook and on YouTube. So we'll link to those as well. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to Andrew, Scott, and Heather for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.